Thanks, Ivy. I'm Jenny Palazio, and I'm a United Way Next volunteer, and I'm also a staff person at United Way Worldwide. I'm currently working with the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, and I am delighted to introduce Dawn Helmrich to you all. She has quite a um, impressive resume. Most recently, she was the director of data and measurement at United Way of Milwaukee and Waukesha and she was at that United Way for 20 years. She's currently consulting with nonprofits, but in addition, she's been an advocate on behalf of victims of sexual assault, and she's been recognized for her efforts on behalf of that work. Most in 2019, she was received a proclamation from the mayor of the city of Milwaukee for her work. She's also an author, and that's why you're here, is to hear about her journey to become a published author. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Dawn. Dawn, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So welcome everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here today, talking about kind of my journey on being a published author. I will say that there is a lot that goes into being a published author. And right before this, Ivy and I were just kind of, I don't know if you want to call it commiserating, but partially commiserating, because Ivy is also a published author, and Carol's holding up both of our books right now. It's really cute. She had them both on her shelf, and so she brought them over so that she could show everyone. And I think Ivy's gonna pull up my slides for me so I can get started. And she's giving me the in a second. Great. So this first slide, you'll see that my name is on here. I'm an author, I'm a writer, I'm a live stream co-host with Neil, who's also on this call today, who is also one of my very, very good friends. I'm a speaker, I'm a blogger, I'm an advocate, I'm a consultant, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a friend, I'm an aunt, I'm a daughter. But I will tell you that the my entire persona has been shaped by the thing that is literally written the biggest and the boldest. And that is I am a survivor. And I often say that I don't really know of anybody who's not a survivor of something. We all experience some type of trauma in our lives. And if you don't, you are incredibly blessed. So the I am a survivor of sexual assault, and that has shaped who I am as a person. And so today I'm going to be talking about my journey to book writing. And just a quick trigger warning, it does include some information about sexual violence and gun violence. So just be aware that part of this talk will include that information. So the agenda for today is I'm going to share who I am. I don't think that you can talk about being an author without giving some context about the person that you are. And then I'm going to talk about what does it take to be a writer, what to write about, different kinds of writing, why journaling is important to mental health, my journey through writing, how to publish, and then some final tips and takeaways. So, who am I? I am a 53-year-old who survived a very brutal rape and attack when I was 21 years old. So 32 years ago, I was walking to a party in the neighborhood where I lived, and I was followed by three young men who had guns. And just before I was about to knock on the door of the party that I was going to, they stopped me, pointed guns at me, and raped me. Um, I always say that, like, that was 2 hours of my life, that changed the entire course of my life. Um, it it's interesting because those 2 hours were not the end, they were actually the beginning of, a very difficult struggle for me, and, um, I I had there was a lot of victim blaming that happened, in my particular circumstance, and I learned very, very quickly that, um, that people thought that what happened to me, I was somehow responsible for. And my rape was very, it was a stranger. I did not know the 3 individuals. Um, Stranger rape is very, very rare. Um, and typically you know your perpetrator. So, I was really, uh, surprised at how often people would say to me that, um that I should have done something differently. And that began from the very first moment that, I encountered, the first responder on the scene. So, um, so I really realized, over the course of about 5 or 6 years that I needed to do something, to help me process what had happened to me, and one of those things that I chose to do was to start writing about it. Um, I had always, like, loved creative writing, and I had always done poetry, um, and so I began to write poems, about what had happened to me and what I was experiencing. And, um, those things were really helpful for me. That writing was really helpful for me. So I wanna talk a little bit now that I've kind of shared who I am about what it takes to be a writer. And the answer to that is very simple. It doesn't take anything to be a writer. Um, a pen and a piece of paper. If you have the desire to write, um, your experiences, your feelings of expression, sometimes a good prompt or a single thought, is all it takes. Uh, and I I always encourage people to write it down. I don't know about you, any of you on this call, but there's been so many times where I've gone to bed and I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking of things and my head is swirling and I start writing this like really beautiful poem in my head and I don't stop to, like, get up and get a pen and a piece of paper, and it's, like, swirling in my head, and then I go to sleep, and I wake up the next day, and it's gone, and I'm so mad because I'm like, "Oh my gosh, if I would have written that down, that was brilliant, like, what was I thinking?" Or I do it in the shower too, I'll, just be, like, crafting something in my head um, and I'll be like, "Okay, as soon as I get out of the shower, like, I gotta write this down, like, that was really, really good." And then I get distracted by something else and I forget, and I walk away from it. I learned to, like, keep a pad and a pen and a piece of paper next to my bedside and, like, really to be thoughtful about, writing down my thoughts and my feelings when they come to me, because, you know, I feel like I have a whole book of poetry that never got written because I never stopped to write it down. Um, I'm also, uh, a like, a one-time writer, so when I write, like, a piece of poetry, I usually don't touch it after. Like, I just write it, and whatever it is what it is. poor Neil, he can probably attest to this because he gets a lot of my blogs for our show that I co-host with him. And I just literally write them and then I hit send and I send them to him. And he has to decide what to do with them once he gets them. But but you know, there are a lot of people when they write that go back and they rewrite and they rewrite and they rewrite. And I'm just not one of those people, especially with poetry. Um, because I feel like the raw emotion of that piece um just kind of like fell out of me, and it just needs to be as authentic as possible because it just sort of fell out of me. So I don't think it takes anything to be a writer. Everyone can write. So a lot of times people say, well, I don't know what to write about. And I think that so I've written a children's book. Um, I have not published it. I wrote it back before my kids were born, and my kids are 26, 24, and 23. Um, and I still don't even know if I'm going to publish it or not yet, but I I wanted my kids to have something that I could share with them that really talked about bullying, and how to not be a bully. I didn't want my children to be the bullies. And so the whole book is about not being a bully and in being inclusive and including people into situations so that they don't feel left out. Um, I write about what I'm passionate about, and what I'm passionate about may change on on a daily basis. Um, Sometimes I write about my experiences, sometimes I write about being a mom, sometimes I write about my mental health, sometimes I write um about my relationships with people. So I think it's important to write about things that you're passionate about. My particular book that I got published is a memoir. Um, and I think a lot of times when people experience severe trauma, being able to sort of get that out into the world um, is cathartic and super, super helpful to the person who's writing it. Um, I wasn't, I, I had no intention of publishing my book when I first was writing it. Um, I was writing it for me, and I knew that going into it, so I didn't have the like expectation that I was going to publish it. Um, so there was no disappointment. I think I did it on purpose. Like I set myself up to think I'm not going to publish it so that if I didn't publish it, I wouldn't be disappointed in myself. Um, but you can, you know, there's a lot of people who are really good fiction writers too. Um, I know several authors who write fabulous fiction books. That's not my genre at all. I have to write about real life stuff. Um, or write about anything that brings you joy. I think, you know, my poetry in the beginning was incredibly dark, because that was the place that I was in at that time. And as I sort of made this transformation to healing and advocacy, the poetry became lighter, and more whimsical than when I first experienced the trauma that I experienced. Um, so I think you can write about anything that brings you joy or that brings you pain. Um, both of those things are really important. Um, so I always talk about you do not have to write a novel. Uh, it's not a competition for how many pages of a book you write. When I was first writing my book, I really thought, like, well, I can't publish this because it's not enough. There's not enough pages. I should write more because there's not enough pages. And a very, very good friend of mine, who Neil also knows, Candace, had written a book, and her book was a little more than 100 pages. And I had read it, and I was transformed by it, absolutely transformed by it. And it had nothing to do with how many pages there was in it. Absolutely nothing to do with how many pages. But I think, we have this idea that a book isn't good enough if it isn't, a certain number of pages. And it's really about the story more than anything else. Um, you can write short stories. I have some lovely books by people who just have a series of short stories in their books. Um, you can write poetry, spoken word. I don't know if anyone on this call has ever heard spoken word before, but it's absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Um, songs and music and lyrics, letters. I have so many beautiful letters that can be so poetic and really meaningful. And blogs. I'm a big blog person. I love writing blogs. I love when I have a topic and I can just sit down and write a blog. So why journal? Um, I I feel like writing for me is healing. And enjoy if you enjoy writing, I think being able to sit down and write out your feelings in whatever form is best for you, um, can be really therapeutic, incredibly therapeutic. I think it also helps you to organize your thoughts. Um, Depending upon your personality type and if you have I have a lot of mental health diagnosis, and my mind can be incredibly chaotic. And I talk about it like I have, you know 37 channels in my head all at the same time, and each one of them is playing something different. And to try and capture what it is that I'm thinking about, and organize it into some kind of um, something that's not so chaotic, really helps me. And writing is one of those things that helps me to organize my thoughts. Um, it also helps when you start to write to publish. Um, I The way in which my writing has worked, is that I wrote a whole bunch of nothing first. Um, I wrote down a lot of thoughts and ideas and things that I wanted to say, and things that I wanted to write about. And then when I decided that I wanted to write a book, I had all of these things that helped me get started with that, because, I just wrote every little bit down. Um, and I think, Ivy, this is where I kind of want to bring you into the conversation, if you don't mind. We had talked ahead of time, and Ivy also wrote a book, and I'm curious, Ivy, like what has writing been like for you, and writing a book for you been like?
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of like how it felt to start writing the book and whether or not you were going to decide to publish. Something that I've always said is I wrote the book, my first book, it's a poetry memoir about for my own healing, but I published it for the healing of others. I very easily could have just used it to cope with my own experiences and then let it sit on a shelf. But instead, I knew like if it just helped one person, then like what I went through was worth it. And so for me, I think I kind of, yes, I write for my own healing, but then with my second book, I started writing to heal those parts of myself, but um, with a reader in mind. Because for my second one, it's all about like the things that I wish I had learned as a woman growing up, um, either from other people or like the things I wish I just didn't have to learn the hard way. Like, if somebody could just grab me by the shoulders and shake me and be like, "You don't deserve this. You don't have to stay in this. Like, you deserve kindness and love and respect and all of these things," and the things that I just wish someone, like, told me ahead of time. So for me, my ideas come from all over the place, but I definitely agreed with you, like, real life stuff is what inspires a lot of my writing. Um, that is where we differ. I do write fiction as well as nonfiction, but, it was because of, like, all of the dark writing I was doing. I was like, "I need to inject something into this, make it fictional, otherwise people are gonna be concerned about me." So I was like, "Yeah, this just can't be real anymore." So my writing, it's all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. I think writing for me, it helps when I feel triggered, or upset or angry or frustrated or confused or scared. Um, it's almost a it's almost an escape for me. It helps me get out of that dark place that I'm in, which kind of seems counterintuitive because you're writing about this like experience or sadness or frustration that you're feeling in that moment. Um, but it's for me, it's like getting it out. It's very therapeutic. It helps me to get what's on my mind off of my mind in some way. Um, but writing can also be associated with joy and happiness and pleasure. My mom died 5 years ago, and it was a very, very, very difficult for me. My mom was a complete and total rock for me. She was the only consistent person I had in my life after I was raped, and um, uh, she was, by and far my best friend. And I remember after she died during the pandemic. And so she actually died in April of 2020. So we weren't allowed to have a memorial. We couldn't really do anything for her. Um, and the only thing that we could do is write an obituary. And my brother and I sat down to write that obituary. And I remember the feeling of absolute joy I had talking about her. Um, Even in that like really painful place that I was in, how sad I was, how lost I felt, writing about her um, just gave me this euphoria and this feeling of happiness, that I like I was so happy that writing that made me feel that way because that sadness was so overwhelming in that moment. So writing can be associated with joy and happiness and pleasure. It doesn't always have to come out of pain. Um, and then I just kind of put two questions down here, and I've already talked about them, but I just want you to think for a minute, how many times have you written something in your head, never put it down on paper? And how does it make you feel when you can't remember that brilliant thing that you were so passionate about when you were thinking about it in your head, and it just kind of like disappeared. And I seriously think that there could have been so many times that I could have like had a whole poetry book, in my repertoire had I just written down these things that I was thinking when I was thinking them. Um, so, so my journey through writing, and I do not want to persuade people against writing, with what my journey was like. This was just my journey. Um, So it took me 15 years to write my book from cover to cover. Um, I have had 10 different versions of it. Um, I the first time I wrote it, I actually wrote it on like pieces of paper, handwritten pieces of paper. And when I was cleaning out my house to sell it last year, I came across this stapled version that younger me had like written, and like I stapled it like in three places like it was like an actual book. I thought that was so cute that I did that. Um and and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But it was the first version, um and there were so many versions after that that kind of like morphed onto, the computer and the writing. Oh, good. Ivy said she wrote her first book in 30 days. So that's awesome. Um, but when I got to a place where I think I knew that I wanted to publish it, because Ivy and I talked about this, and I'll let you step in too, Ivy, if you want. Um, I when you write a book, like a memoir, what happens is that you completely expose yourself. Um, and there were a lot of things in my book that nobody knew about me. Absolutely nobody knew about me. And I knew that once I published it, there was no turning back. Everyone was going to know these things about me. And I had two children, um, grown children, that I was like, if they read this book, they are going to see their mom in an incredibly different way. Ivy, do you want to talk about your experience too with that?
Yeah, so I mine is also poetry, so it is a little bit shorter to write. I will start with that. But mine is a memoir as well. So I definitely exposed the secrets of my childhood and adolescence, all of the things that were going on in my family that people didn't know about. Um, I was terrified. I had it written, I think, in 2017, but I didn't actually um, publish until 2019 because I didn't know how it would impact me or how people perceived me. And I had uh, like aunts and uncles reach out and go like, I had no idea that that was happening. I didn't know that your parents did that. I didn't know you were experiencing this. I had people from high school that reached out and said like, I just got your book. I read it all in one sitting. You were always like the happiest person in school. You were smiling, you were talking to everyone. I had no idea that anything was wrong. And when Dawn and I also talked about like her kids reading it. When I published, I was 2 years post-divorce. I was single and about ready to try dating. And I was like, how's this going to impact this? And then guys were buying my book and were asking me questions about it. And I was like, there's a lot in there that I would rather you learn from me instead of reading it. So yeah, there are definitely impacts to publishing, especially when you open up your heart and you're writing about things that you're passionate about and care about and you've experienced. Fiction is definitely different.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ivy. I really appreciate that because um I think, you know, a lot of people who have read my book have said very similar things like, I mean, we knew that this happened to you, but you know, you always seem so positive and you always seem so energetic um and two things can be true at the same time. But I do think like a lot of times when you experience like heavy trauma, you really learn how to mask that. Because there's no way that you can survive in life if you don't find a way to cope that that you know shows that you're happy, and sometimes we mask that, which is also why writing is so incredibly important, because you know, when I write, it's so incredibly raw, and I get to take that mask completely off and just sort of say whatever I want to say. And not everything that I say has to be published, right? Some of those things are simply for me. Some of the rawest, scariest, you know, darkest poetry that I've written, um, you know, if somebody else read some of those things, they would probably be like, you need to call the suicide hotline like this minute, right? And for me, it was an expression that I just needed to get out of my body and onto a piece of paper to help me. um I also did some very authentic research. I wanted my book to be as true and accurate um, about what I had experienced. And so I actually went and pulled up all of the archives in at the courthouse from my trials, and I read all of the transcripts from my trials, and that was in. I needed an emotional break after that. Um, there were a lot of things that I did not remember, that when I read the transcripts, I was like, whoa, like everything came flooding back to me. And I think our bodies and brains do this protective thing, which is a lot of times why what what somebody who has been through something traumatic says on the scene of a crime doesn't always come across in a courtroom the same way, because we have these protective mechanisms that stop us from remembering the most painful pieces. And so our stories in the moment might be different than what we remember when we're being asked to recall. um and so I was so glad that I went and got the transcripts, but I had to take a break, um, because there were just so many things that I had to recall after reading those transcripts. In my book, the actual transcripts from some of the trial is actually in there word for word, and the names are just redacted. I was originally going to paraphrase, and I just couldn't. I needed those to be in there as they were. Um, Proper editing. So for me, I am not an editor. I could not edit my book myself. So I hired somebody to do that for me. Um, and unfortunately, the first person that I hired was a college student that got sort of recommended to me. But she did not do a fantastic job. She was finishing up her degree, and I think that made it more difficult for her. So when I got to the point where I was gonna publish my book, my husband and I sat down and I read it out loud, and he sat next to me and read it like as I was reading it, and realized that there were a lot of errors still in it. Um, and I also realized that I didn't like how it turned out. Um, and that was a big bummer because I had read, like I had read chapters of it here and chapters of it there, but I had not read it from start to finish. And when I read it from start to finish, there were some really big gaps. And the timeline was kind of like I had like um things out of order, and I just decided I need another editor and I need to fill in some of these gaps. And so that took me a whole nother year to do. And I was really disappointed because I wanted to publish it on the 30th anniversary of when I got raped. And then I realized that that just really didn't matter. Like it just really didn't. The extra year was worth taking to make sure that it was everything that I wanted it to be. Um, I am not an artist. I can't even draw stick people. So I needed somebody to do a cover for me. And I got really, really lucky because I went to Milwaukee High School of the Arts, and I went to school with a lot of very creative people. I was a musical theater person, but there were a lot of artists that I had through Milwaukee High School of the Arts. And one of my artist friends offered to do a pencil drawing for me to see if I knew exactly what I wanted the cover to look like. Um, and I told her what I wanted it to look like, and she pencil drew what I had asked her to, and it was the absolute exact thing that I wanted. And so I was really excited for that. Um, and the road to publishing for me was I had some friends who had written books and they had used a publishing company. Um, Publishing companies are very expensive. Um, I don't I I didn't use one. So um I think you probably sell more books if you use a publishing company because they do the marketing for you. But for me, it wasn't about the number of books that I was selling. I knew I was not going to, be a millionaire. I knew that I was no J.K. Rowling. I knew that, this book was really written for my own purposes and for the purposes of helping other people to heal. Um, so I decided to self-publish on Amazon. Um, I found out very quickly that self-publishing on Amazon um, is a little bit more difficult than what my technical skills were. And so I was able to get somebody who could help me like get all the specs in line and make sure everything was lined up properly. And like I it my Amazon rejected my um publishing at least 9 or 10 times where I didn't know that you had to like end on an odd page number. Like I didn't know that. So there were just like certain things that made it a little bit more difficult. And I'm 53 and I don't have the technology skills that somebody who's 20 years younger than me has. So I would definitely say, uh, you know, uh, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so I was lucky to be able to go to people that were able to help me with that. Um, so, oops. So the number one way most people get published is to self-publish. Um, I did learn that bookstores would not pick up my book if it was only published on Amazon. that I had to go to an independent self-publisher called Ingram Sparks in order for bookstores to actually buy my book and put it on the shelves. So I published through Ingram Sparks as well. Um, and now you can get my book anywhere. Like if you type in the title, it'll come up at Barnes and Nobles. It comes up everywhere. Which, by the way, the coolest thing in the world, right? To like type in the name of your book and see that you can buy it from Barnes and Nobles. Like that was really, really cool. Um, also, I looked for different social media groups to kind of get on, writing groups. So I'm a part of the Wisconsin Writers Association, where you can just kind of like put your book out there. I tried to find like different contests and different ways to submit my works to get it out there. I do a lot of like book reading at libraries, um, and things like that, where like two people from the library show up, but it doesn't matter, right? I'm just putting it out there. Um, I did, I do a lot of like public speaking. Like I just did a talk at the um American Association of University Women's Club, which was fantastic. There were just 78 women over the age of 70 who just sat there and listened to what I had to say, and then they all bought my book because they were just enthralled. So it was really cool. So, kind of the last thing I want to say before I finish up is make sure everything is right before you hit publish when you're publishing a book. And I say that because um, my dear friend Neil, once my book was published, he said, Dawn, you have a spelling error. So if you look at what my book says, it says woman's determination to become a thriver, and it should be an A instead of an E. It should say woman's. And I can't change it unless I were to do a second edition of my book. So in perpetuity, it is out there with that error, and it bothers me to no end, and I know it bothers Neil. Um, but so I highly encourage, to the very bitter end, make sure that every single thing is the way you want it before you hit publish, because you can't take it back once you do. And then again, I just put writing prompts on for people because sometimes people just need that little bit of a push. So I have a couple on here, write about how trauma has impacted your life, how has it changed your relationships or daily choices. Explain the physical sensations that trauma has caused in your body. That can be really helpful to people because sometimes they don't understand what it is they're experiencing. Like, even when I'm talking about it, like right now, I can feel like I'm a little shaky, and, I know I'm nervous, and my teeth are a little chattery, and sometimes it's really helpful to write that down. Write about your favorite person or place or thing. Or think of a time when in your life when you had a very strong reaction to something, and write about that. And finally, tips and takeaways, overcoming any nervousness about writing. Um, I always say write for yourself. It doesn't have to be, the most brilliant thing in the world. I mean, it's a form of art. So write for yourself. Um, it's okay to have some anxiety in writing. Don't hesitate. Just write it out. If you can always change something, you can always go back and make edits and redo. Um, and don't be afraid to publish if that's your goal. I was terrified to publish. I really was. And my book is one of the proudest accomplishments I have in my life. I truly couldn't, I'm really proud of it. And you also don't have to share. If you don't want to publish, don't publish. Write for yourself. So that's pretty much all that I have today. Thank you so much for coming and letting me indulge with my journey on being a published author. Anybody have any questions? I've not been monitoring the chat, so.
There's been a lot in the chat. I've been watching it. I'm sure Jenny and Ivy have as well, but I want to make sure we answer some of the questions. So I don't know, Jenny, do you want to ask the questions that you see, or would you like some help with that?
So it looked like there was a lot of comments from folks with their own experiences. Let me see where we've got here questions for you, Dawn.
There's kind of one near the end, and I'm not sure
Okay.
the last name or the first name. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask it? It's Ashanti.
Oh, it's from Ashanti Harris. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Or you can go
I'm
ahead.
not sure if you can hear me. I'm in at my desk, and it's like in a community space. But I just wanted to know if there was a suggested amount of time to write a day and or a week in order to get your book finished.
Great.
That's a great question. I had like 3 jobs at the time when I was writing my book. I was teaching, and I had a full-time job, and I was also organizing Denim Day, and I sometimes would write for a half an hour. Sometimes I wouldn't write at all in a day. Sometimes I would just take like a weekend and just lock myself in my computer room and really focus on writing. So for me, it was whenever I had that epiphany of this is what I want to write about today, then I would take the time and I would write until that thought had completely gone out of my head. But I don't know that there's any real formula. It depends upon Ivy, do you have any suggestions on that?
So I would say it depends on kind of what works for you. Obviously, there's night owls, there's those of us that I can't remember the term now, but when you have ADHD or autism and you are kind of like forcing yourself to stay up because nobody is perceiving you. And I think parents probably go through this a lot. You stay up because children are in bed, significant other might be in bed, and maybe that's your writing time. It also depends on what you're writing, because for me, still not following it, because I have to push out the book I've already written. But when it became clear to me what my like page count goal was, so if I wanted to write a poetry book that's about 180 pages, there's probably 10 to 15 pages of like the other stuff that's supposed to be in a book, so that might be around 200. 180 divided by like 2 pages a day is roughly 3 months. So even sometimes if you just know what your page count is, like in YA and NA, like fiction, sometimes that's about 150,000 words. If you know how many pages that is, you can kind of reverse engineer it to make your plan. Because at this rate, if I was writing 2 poems a day, I could be putting out between like 1 and 4 books a year. I'm not doing that because on my end, I was the one that did my covers. I did all my formatting. I hired an editor and fired an editor, so I did all of that. So sometimes it kind of depends on what that process is going to look like for you and what your end goal is as well.
Thanks, Ivy.
Mhm.
Anyone else with questions for Dawn while we have her here? And Neil, is that who?
It's not a question.
Oh, okay.
I'm just doing what I do, Jenny.
Yeah, I know, Neil. Thank you, Neil. Neil brings a lot of color commentary to these events. I did also want to drop into the chat a link to a page on United Way Next's website, because there are other published authors in our network, and there's some good books there that some of you may find it interesting. So I'm going to throw that in there as well, that you might want to check out. It does include both Dawn's and Ivy's books, links to those as well. And if any of you get published, please send your information on to Carol so she can update the page, and Ivy. That would be helpful too when you, not if, when you become published. Let's see here. What do we got here? I'm sorry, my laptop is not letting me see very well the chat. Let's see here.
I think
I
you've
didn't
covered
see a
everything.
lot of questions.
No, I think you're good.
You know, and one other thing, I have a friend whose mother has written quite a few plays, and she self-published them and produced them locally at community groups. And plays are another way that you can kind of be creative and get your thoughts out and share them with others, is through theatrical type of writing.
Yeah, for sure. I actually had a group back probably 15 years ago that I belong to the RAIN Speakers Bureau, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. And a teenage after school theater group in Chicago invited me to come talk to them. And their project was to write a play about some type of like trauma. And so they wrote a play about my experience and the experience of somebody who was in a gang, and they interviewed him, and it was just it was incredible what they did. And they put this whole play on in Chicago at a bunch of different places. It was really cool.
I think Allison had unmuted, but I think she also had to drop off. And so I'm just going to say Allison Anthony is from Tulsa, and I believe she's writing a book because I met with her not too long ago. So I think she was really interested in the session. So Dawn, thanks for doing that. And then I just threw in the chat, as Jenny said, about writing plays. So I forgot until literally this moment. And this is something I would suggest to people who are kind of on the fence about, you know, writing or preparing themselves. I was leading our children's ministry program at our church, and I wasn't happy with the plays that I was finding for the kids to do at Christmas. Now, granted, there's a story, if you're a Christian, that you would tell at Christmas about the birth of Christ, right? But I wanted to do it differently. And I approached someone at my church and said, you know, when I was a kid, I remember you writing plays. And would you consider doing this? And she turned and looked at me and said, you have the potential and the capacity to do this yourself. You need to just do it. And it was just that encouragement that made me go, you know what, I'm going to try it. And I literally started writing these, and then they would kind of roll into the next year. So I have a series of 4 plays that are really actually quite well done. I mean, the kids did a fabulous job with it. And, you know, this is kind of back at a time when I wasn't saving things electronically, which is awful because I had a hard time finding some of the copies, but I eventually did. And then now I have all 4 copies together with a hard copy. So if anything ever happens, I've got them. But, you know, that would just be a great example. The people that benefited from that, the children, the people who witnessed their kids in these shows. And afterwards, I'll say, I was, you know, proud of what I had done, but really what made me most proud is people said to me, this was one of the best shows I've ever been at, or best Christmas programs. Are you going to do this every year? Which is inspiring to me to then continue that. And the year that I stopped, it was completely different, and people showed up expecting what they had gotten. So needless to say, if you have the interest, then you have the potential and you should be writing. So
Love that, Carol. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you for
totally
sharing that.
forgot about all that till this moment. So thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's great.
Well, I hope this has been helpful to everyone who's joined today. And if you want to follow up with any questions later, please do. We're happy to try to get you answers and get you pointed in the right direction. And of course, keep us posted on your progress. That would be wonderful to hear how you where you land eventually with your efforts.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, Dawn. And thank you, Ivy, for putting this, all together. And Dawn, really for sharing your story, not just your writing journey, but also the story of what you've been through in your lifetime and how you've been able to come out on the other side of it. So such a great session. It was so nice to see everybody. Thanks again for joining us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next event. Again, this was brought to you today by FrontStream, one of our sponsors, and we'll look forward to seeing you at another next event coming up in October. Have a great day, everybody.